information from another USB device called a Y-SPI, and that will show you the raw ambient RF levels of a particular channel. So you can gauge congestion, or you can gauge interference, you can measure it, you can say, okay, I'm going to go find whatever is transmitting on this particular channel and causing me a lot of problems. So that's what spectrum analysis is. It's very simple. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. So once we tackled that and we created a product that is now being sold all over the world, we wanted to move into packet analysis. And packet analysis was very critical for a lot of people designing modern Wi-Fi networks, because now with the proliferation of Wi-Fi, we have too many devices on a particular channel. And the only way you can actually see device activity is by listening to all the packets going through the air. And so the software that we'll be talking about today it's called IPA. This is relatively new. It's been out a year. It just got a new update, which some of the new features, and I think a lot of you will appreciate what we've done with it. And this will help you kind of optimize a lot of the small things. It'll help you evaluate the kind of congestion that you're seeing on a particular channel, and it'll also see how efficient vendor hardware is being over the air. And then lastly, MetaGeek also is a reseller of site survey software. So these are the programs where you take a map and you walk around and it will show you where the dead zones are. Now, we don't have a webinar yet that talks about site survey software. The design considerations for dual band Wi-Fi is the closest, where we talk about planning using site survey software. And we'll talk about the 2.4 gigahertz versus the 5 gigahertz, which is a great introduction to this next slide. And let's see if I can get this presentation running properly. Give me 1 second to refresh this. I'm going to take away the screen for a second, and then we'll jump back up. So. I apologize for the delay. I use Google Docs for a lot of this, and the main reason I use it is because people will copy the slides after the presentation is done, because they like to kind of write notes on it. So if you do have questions about the slide, I'll show my contact information again. You can request a copy of the slide, and I'd be happy to send you that. So let me get the presentation going in the GoToMeeting again. Okay, if someone could use the question to give me some feedback, whether they can actually see my application now, see if it's working. Great. Okay, so I start most of my presentations off talking about the basic fundamentals of the spectrum. So Wi-Fi exists in two spectrums. There's a 2.4 gigahertz and there's a 5 gigahertz. Most of you are familiar with the 2.4 gigahertz because that's where a lot of the Wi-Fi is. Now, the 2.4 gigahertz has 11 channels in the US, 13 if you're in Europe. Primarily, everyone uses channels 1, 6, and 11. And the reason they use channels 1, 6, and 11, and if you aren't using these channels, you definitely need to start using these channels, is because each channel is 20 megahertz wide. And that means that there are 3 non-overlapping channels. We have a spectrum that's 100 megahertz wide completely, but we don't have enough spectrum to equally use channel 1 and channel 2 simultaneously. That means channel 2 overlaps with channel 1. So if you were to put a network on channel 2 and you were to put a network on channel 1, they're going to overlap by 75%. Okay? And it was a crazy idea in the beginning. Most people have kind of learned that they should only use channels 1, 6, and 11 because that maximizes the bandwidth available to them. And if they were to put their networks on channels 1 and channel 2, all of a sudden they'd overlap 75%, and then they transmit at the same time and corrupt 75% of the transmissions. So whenever they talk at the same time, they're going to have problems. Okay. So the 2.4 gigahertz, just think of it like this. You have 3 non-overlapping channels. That's it. That's all you have. The 2.4 gigahertz is relatively small bandwidth available. So it's a relatively small frequency range available. you have 3 channels. That means that if some non-Wi-Fi transmitter, let's say a microwave oven or a cordless phone or even a wireless mouse, if that's on to affect one of those channels, and it might affect 2 of those channels, and we'll talk about some of those examples later. But when there is something transmitting on a particular Wi-Fi channel at the same time, their waves collide, and that causes problems. Now, some of you have used Insider. I assume most of you have used Insider. Insider looks something like this. So we draw where each network is. And then if you notice, this image looks a little bit different. It's got lights in the background. This is a spectrum analysis capture. This shows us the density or saturation of particular channels. So you'll notice channel 11 here has more saturation. It's more red. There's a lot more activity on that channel, whereas channel 1, less activity. This is the better channel to use. Okay, so a spectrum analyzer helps you choose channels based on the amount of noise on a particular channel. So when I talk about the 4 gigahertz being saturated with Wi-Fi devices, that's because all 802.11bgn devices, which is almost all laptops, smartphones, tablets, they're all accessing Wi-Fi primarily in the 2.4 gigahertz. And one of the reasons the 2.4 gigahertz took off quickly was because it had greater range. Okay, and the downside of greater range means that all these devices transmit further. And when you hear more devices, that means you are going to wait for your turn to talk. Wirelesses have duplex. We'll talk about it in a minute. But when you hear more devices, you are going to wait longer. Now the 5 gigahertz, this is where you're going to have greater performance because it has less range. Indoors, it has less range, which means you think that you have more opportunities to talk because you hear less devices. Also, you have 24 non-overlapping channels. Okay, and the total number of channels is going to vary depending on your regulatory body wherever you are living. But in the U.S., we have 24 non-overlapping channels. That number changes every now and then. So currently, it might be 22. However, this is where we will see 802.11a, 802.11n, and the latest 802.11ac. 802.11ac goes up to 6.9 gigabits per second. Okay, we are going to see greater range in the 5 gigahertz because 1, we don't have as much. The impact from interference is less in the 5 gigahertz. If there's interference on a channel, you can choose a new one very easily. There's lots of channels to choose from. 2, there's less overlapping interference in the 5 gigahertz. In fact, there's not overlapping interference. None of the channels overlap. Okay, and 3, we're going to have greater performance because it has lower indoor range. We don't hear as many devices. And you'll look at the spectrum captures, you'll notice there's lots of greens and there's lots of reds in this spectrum analysis capture. When we look at the 5 gigahertz capture, we see almost nothing. There's some dark blues, there's relatively not a lot of activity going on. So why does this all matter? Why does Wi-Fi congestion matter to us? Well, wireless is half duplex. That means no 2 devices can transmit at the same time. You can't have an iPad and an access point on the same channel transmitting exactly at the same time. What happens is the waves collide, and this causes a collision. And so when you have collisions, both of the devices receive garbled messages. They both say, I don't know what you sent, and I don't know what you sent. Okay? They both have question marks. They don't know what it means. So that means every single device has to play a waiting game. They have to sit there, and they have to wait, and they have to listen. So the iPad is going to transmit his frame to the access point, or some of you may call it a wireless router. That's okay. And the access point is going to say, got it. And when he says got it, that means he responds with an acknowledgement similar to TCP/IP. He sends data ACK. We're doing the same thing in Wi-Fi. It's not going to look exactly the same, but we're doing the same. It's fundamentally the same thing. Okay. Now let's say there's interference. That interference can come from a non-Wi-Fi source, like let's say a baby monitor. Baby monitor comes on, he causes waves in the same frequency range, and the waves are taller, which means they're louder. And this means that the recipient says, well, I don't know what that was. And when he doesn't know what it was, he does not respond with an acknowledgement. So the iPad has to send his frame again, and we call this a retransmission. Now, we're all here for this packet analysis webinar because this is what we care about. We want to know how often devices have to repeat themselves. So if there's interference and devices are having to repeat themselves, there's an inefficiency that we need to be aware of. Okay, so not only did he take time away from everyone else by transmitting originally, he had to take the time again to send it, to duplicate himself, so the recipient can say, yes, I got it. Okay, so meanwhile, while this iPad is sending it, everyone is waiting, and then the access point says, okay, I got that one, acknowledgement. Okay, what we care about in packet analysis is how efficiently these things are happening. When a data frame is sent, let's say, at 1 megabit per second, so the slowest possible. This is dial-up speeds, okay? 1 megabit. He sends it very, very slow. And then because it was so slow, it took up so much airtime, the opportunity for interference to happen, it comes here and the recipient says, I don't know. And then he sends it slow again. And he'll send it again and again and again. All of a sudden, this slow device that's talking very slowly and repeating himself starts using up a lot of available airtime just for that acknowledgement to come. Okay, so packet analysis helps us see when devices are being efficient. It shows us how often they're repeating themselves. And it also shows us what other devices are talking on a particular channel. Okay, so if we were to kind of like look at this from an aerial view, an access point broadcasts a frame for iPad number 4. He broadcasts it omnidirectionally. That means every single device hears it. This is critical to Wi-Fi. Every single Wi-Fi device has to play the game. They have to wait and listen for other devices. So they all hear the original frame and they say, okay, well, I'm going to back off. I'm going to power down, and I'm going to wait for that transaction to finish. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated when we have things like hidden nodes, and so you can have an access point talking to a specific laptop, and what's interesting is the laptop is going to send a data frame, and the data frame is going to look something like this. He sends the data frame omnidirectionally, and the access point says, got it. And when he says got it, that means he sends an acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement gets sent omnidirectionally. Now the laptop on the right-hand side, he didn't hear the original transmission of the data frame, okay? But he did hear the acknowledgement. So he heard the acknowledgement and he says, okay, I need to back off, or I need to. Now this is a good opportunity for the access point to turn on request to send, clear to send, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But this basically means that every single device has to ask for permission to talk, because what ends up happening is we have two devices. Let's see if I actually drew that out. Nope, I didn't. Okay. What ends up happening is we have two devices that transmit at the same time. So laptop 2 and laptop 1. Let's see, laptop 2 and laptop 1 transmit data frames at the same time. Now, if they transmit at the same time on the same channel, they cause a collision right here at the access point, and the access point said, I didn't understand either of you. And this is when he turns on request to send, clear to send, and he says, okay, you guys are talking at the same time. We need to have some organization. Laptop 1, you talk. Laptop 2, you talk. Laptop 1, you talk. And so he kind of acts like the central figure in kind of a hub and spoke topology, where he says, okay, I'm going to direct this conversation. Now, a lot of you have probably done some sort of packet capture. You've looked at a log from an access point, and you heard all the frames from the access point's perspective. Okay, so you get to hear all of the laptops. You get to hear exactly as it occurred to the access point. Now, what if I told you that there was something that was transmitting right here next to the laptop, and its range was outside of the range of the access point? Okay, so there's another device, there's another access point, and it's on the same channel, it's transmitting, but the access point does not hear it. Okay, and nor does this other laptop. Well, this one is actually affecting the laptop here because wireless is half duplex. So that laptop has to wait for him to finish talking. All of this, and I know I'm going through this quickly. We'll kind of bring it all to one big kind of final conclusion. But what this basically means is there are other devices that you can't see from the laptop's perspective that affect performance. And it's very critical that you have a device that you can go to the location of the problem. Let's say you have people complaining about an issue that's happening in the corner of the office. Well, you can go to that issue and you can actually see all of the 802.11 frames and see exactly where it's happening. So you can troubleshoot from the perspective of a client device, like a particular laptop. You can look here. And if you capture from right here, you're going to miss the activity from laptop number 2, but you might hear additional noise happening from neighboring networks that's occurring on that channel. Okay. You can also capture right underneath the access point, hear everything. You can also walk around and get a general idea of what the wireless environment looks like. Okay, so we know that in 802.11 we have data ACK. That's how things work. And we also know that wireless is half duplex. That means only one device can talk at a time. That means we all have to play kind of a waiting game. So there's 3 types of interference. The first 2 are immediately within your control to handle. The first type is co-channel interference. Co-channel interference is, for example, bringing 100 iPads, putting them on a single channel and a single access point. It's kind of like bringing one pie to a party of 100 people and saying, okay, you each get a slice. And everyone at the party says, whoa, I don't get any slice. This is too small for me. Okay, so co-channel interference is having a lot of Wi-Fi devices on a particular channel. And in my environment, it's perfect. We're going to see a great example of that. The next type is adjacent channel interference. This is completely within your control. Okay, adjacent channel interference, well, it's kind of in your control. When you are designing a large-scale wireless network, if you use channels 1, 6, and 11, you won't have adjacent channel interference. You won't have the networks that are overlapping each other. But if you notice here, we have networks and their devices, so the access point on channel 4, and then we have all the iPads on channel 4, and then we have iPads on channel 6, and we have iPads on channel 5. All of these overlap with each other. Okay? The reason this is important is because Wi-Fi has to play a waiting game. If you overlap, you hear 25% of a conversation or 75% of the conversation, and the rest is garbled to you. So you don't know when to cooperate. You are just going to assume that you can talk, and when you assume that you can talk, you're going to cause a corruption or a collision in the wireless environment. And when that collision happens, you have to repeat yourself. And guess what? They have to repeat themselves. And then you're causing more and more collisions. So it's better to share a channel than it is to overlap one. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and test it yourself. Do throughput tests with overlapping wireless networks. I think you'll be surprised. Non-Wi-Fi. Now this is something that we will notice the symptoms of non-Wi-Fi interference when we do packet analysis, but there's no way for us to identify it. And the reason there isn't a way for us to identify it is because packet analysis is listening to Wi-Fi language only. So we look at the Wi-Fi frames and we say, oh, I know what those mean. The rest of it is just noise to me. Okay, it's kind of like being an English speaker in China. The only time you understand what someone is saying is when they speak English. The rest of the time it's Chinese. It's all noise to you. Okay, so if you're interested in tracking down non-Wi-Fi interference, you have dead zones or anything like that, I highly recommend our visual spectrum analysis webinar. Okay, so Insider shows you adjacent channel interference. It also shows you the co-channel interference to some degree. Now this is just the access points. We don't talk about client devices at all with Insider. It's just the access point. You have no idea how congested a particular access point is. You have no idea how many devices there are on that in Insider. You have no idea. Okay, the Spectrum Analyzer gets closer. We can show you all the activity client devices are showing, but it comes across as noise. You know, for example, if you walk into a bar, you say, oh, there's a lot of people talking, it's loud in here. Kind of what a Spectrum Analyzer is capable of showing. It also shows you when there's something like an air horn in the room, where it's loud and constant, and it's on your channel. And it will show you the channel that's free, so you can avoid it. You can move your access point to channel 1 and avoid the interference, so you can avoid dead zones. That's what a Spectrum Analyzer is going to show you. Now, what packet analysis is going to help us with, not only do we see the access point, the signal strength of the access point, we get to see the signal strength of laptops, tablets, smartphones. We get to see how often they talk. We get to see their MAC addresses. We get to see the total amount of airtime they take up. We get to see how often they're repeating themselves. And most importantly, we get to see the activity that's happening from neighboring devices. So every single Wi-Fi device is waiting and playing the waiting game. And if you share the same channel as your neighbor, guess what? It's like sharing internet with your neighbor. You both are having to wait for each other to finish talking. So we get to see the activity and the airtime that's being utilized by neighboring networks. It's very, very useful. Okay, one other thing that's very cool about this software, this is called IPA. This is really, it's packet analysis that's been designed specifically for Wi-Fi troubleshooting. So we're not going to get into application level data. We are strictly looking at Wi-Fi packet analysis. This is going to be unlike any other packet analysis solution that you've seen. Some of you, I noticed that some of you have answered the poll saying you are familiar with packet analysis software. IPA is designed to work with Wireshark. So at any point you can send a filtered file to Wireshark, look at it there, but really we wanted to bring out all of the important things to Wi-Fi troubleshooting. So I talked about earlier that the 2.4 gigahertz has saturation, it has overlapping channels, it has interference. And what I did was I streamed a YouTube video from a particular location, same laptop, same access point, and I just streamed it, and I left my packet analyzer running to see what kind of things I encountered when I streamed it. And this is a great experiment for a lot of you to kind of go through and learn about with the packet analyzer. Okay, so let's kind of break down what we are doing here. This is a multi-layered pie chart. You'll notice that there's a big chunk of this that's purple. Purple represents frames that you do not see if you were to look at packets on the wired side. You don't get to see these. This is Wi-Fi overhead. These are management frames. These are beacons, probe requests, and probe responses. These are all management frames. So most of you have never seen these before. So we noticed that about 40% of the bytes were dedicated to Wi-Fi overhead. Also the control, the orange little slice here, that's also Wi-Fi overhead. Now the blue color is data. So we noticed that about 60% of this was data. And if you notice, this is a multi-layered pie chart. So right here, this is a slice of a pie. This is one AP or a BSSID. Okay? And as it breaks outward, it's going to break out into the clients. So we'll have a client. I'll draw C's here for clients. One of these client devices sent about 60% of the total bytes. That's me. So if I take my mouse over software and I hover over it, you can see it's going to give me some details about that particular slice. These details I've brought over to the right-hand side. Now when you perform a Wi-Fi capture with IPA, you get to see all of the SSIDs similar to Insider. So it'll say there are 27 SSIDs on a channel. What you don't get to see in Insider is how many client devices you see on a particular channel. So in this particular example, we see 311 unique MAC addresses on the channel. That means I have to share a pie with 311 people. And also, of all the data frames being sent, 39% of them are duplicates. To me, that indicates a problem. Okay? We have a lot of devices repeating themselves. There must be some type of interference that's happening. Also, when I transmitted my frame, when I transferred my video from YouTube, so I was streaming something, this is the exact same data. I took up a fair amount of airtime. I sent a fair amount of bytes. But what's interesting is I sent data at 11 megabits per second. Now, if you talk slow, you hog the conversation. You're talking slow, and everyone has to wait for you to finish talking. So when I talk slow, I'm preventing other people from talking. I also had a retransmission rate of 37%, so I am the equivalent of someone that talks slow and repeats themselves, and no one likes that guy. Now, if I were to do the same thing in the 5 gigahertz, if I were to change that up and do the exact same thing in the 5 gigahertz, we'll notice a few things. Not only do I have less networks in the 5 gigahertz, I have less devices. There are 43 unique MAC addresses. Now, some of these unique MAC addresses are not going to be as talkative. They just may be there kind of passing by. Okay, but when I transferred my file, I had a 9% retransmission rate. That's because we don't have overlapping interference. That's because we don't have non-Wi-Fi interference. We just have a better clear environment. So I'm able to talk more efficiently. So if I look at my client level details, 51 megabits per second, I'm talking fast, I'm talking efficient, and I've also reduced the amount of retransmission rates. So when I get on the channel, I say it quickly and I'm done. Someone else can talk. What we want to see. We want to see a pie chart that doesn't have a lot of overhead. So if you look here, we don't want to see a lot of purple, we don't want to see a lot of orange, we want to see a lot of blue. We want to see the data frames going through, and we want to see them with low retransmission rates. Looks like my application closed, so hopefully you can see. Okay, looks like it's back up. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 management frames. We are doing a live demonstration, so I apologize if this is redundant for some of you. There are 3 types of 802.11 frames. Okay, where it's not like Ethernet. We only have 3 types that we care about. So the first type is management. These are all purple in IPA. So anytime you see purple, it's going to be a management frame. These you'll never see on the wired side. Now control are going to be orange. These are very, very critical. These will always be orange in IPA. And then blue will be data frames. Data frames are the only ones that make it onto the wired side. So you miss 2 types of frames when you look at activity on the wired side. So management frames help stations join and leave a wireless network. So the access point is always saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, these are my credentials. And then the client devices are always probing, and they're always saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, or I'm looking for so-and-so with these credentials. And then they also have the authentication and association frames that help devices join and leave a wireless network. So those will always be purple from here on out. The control frames, these control the RF medium and aid in delivery of data and management frames. And basically, these let everyone know that the conversation has ended. If I send a frame and you send an acknowledgement, that lets everyone know, hey, this conversation is over, it's someone else's turn to talk. Then we also have the request to send, clear to send. We talked about that a little bit, where the access point will say, you have to ask permission to speak. So those will always be orange in IPA. Now the data frames, this is what some of you are used to when you look at packets on the wired side. You're used to seeing these frames. And frankly, all you get to see of these frames are the ones of your own wireless network. You don't get to see data frames of your neighbor network, so you don't get to see data frames of other networks on the same channel. You don't get to see that. With IPA, you do. You get to see everyone else's traffic. You get to see what is eating up your available bandwidth on a particular channel. So some people ask, does IPA decrypt the Wi-Fi traffic? No, it does not. We don't care about it, because what we do care about, if you'll notice here, what we care about is how fast the data frames are being sent. So you'll notice these are the speeds that data frames can be sent. So we want to see when things are being sent slow, and we also want to look at these little flags here. So when this has a little arrow here, this kind of a circular signal shape. This is a retransmission. So at some point the frame had to be sent again, and again we notice that this null data frame was sent twice. We want to look out for those instances. And we're almost to the live demonstration, and we do have a smaller group today, so if you do have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But going back to the beginning of saying all Wi-Fi devices are playing a waiting game, it's quite convoluted when a Wi-Fi device actually transmits and has an opportunity to transmit, because it has to follow this flow chart. The first step is checking to see if the channel is idle. If the channel is busy, someone else is talking, they have to back off for a random number. Okay, and that random amount of time gets exponentially higher the more often it comes through and cycles through and says, is the channel idle? So sometimes the device can be waiting a long time to talk. But let's say the channel is idle and we have request to send, clear to send turned on. That means it has to request for permission to speak, and if it does not receive permission to speak, it has to go through this entire cycle again and again. Okay, so all this happens really quickly. We don't really notice it unless there is a noisy, congested environment, and that's when we start having problems. And what it really ends up looking like, and let's throw in 6 devices. What this looks like with 6 devices is something like this. So follow my mouse in the bottom left-hand corner. Station 6 sends a data frame. He receives an acknowledgement. Okay. Every single other device heard that data and acknowledgement. When that acknowledgement came across, they stopped and they said, okay, cool. We're going to finish our backup. So one of them had a backup timer of 7. One of them had a backup timer of 9. The lower number wins. So he goes through and he says, request to send. He receives a clear to send. And that means he gets to send his data frame. Meanwhile, all the other stations, they hear the request to send, they hear the clear to send, and they say, oh, someone else is talking, I'm backing off. And they actually power down to save their battery. As soon as they hear the acknowledgement, it's someone else's turn to talk. One of them has a remaining backup timer of 2 slots. That means he wins, sends his data frame, receives an acknowledgement. So we start thinking about like how many Wi-Fi devices people carry with them to an office environment. They've got their smartphone, they've got their Kindle, they've got their iPad, they've got their laptop, their desktop has a Wi-Fi card. All of these things are Wi-Fi. That means there are more devices that are talking and more devices that are waiting. And so we start getting saturation of Wi-Fi and things start getting slower and slower. And that's why we decided to make a packet analysis that is specifically designed for Wi-Fi analysis. So we're actually sitting at a Wireshark conference, and we love Wireshark. We're friends with the developers of Wireshark, and we resell the AirPCAP NX. And Wireshark is a great tool. However, it doesn't help you visualize things in terms of a conversation. It doesn't make filtering it easy for people getting into packet analysis, and it also doesn't help them see the airtime or things that are bad. And so what we did is we reimagined packet analysis in a multi-layered pie chart. So you'll notice we have the access points in the center, and then as you go outward you have clients, and then the frame types, as we talked about earlier, managements will be purple, orange will be control, and blue will be data. You don't get to see the orange and purple on the wired side. In fact, on the wired side, you only get to see your wireless network devices. You don't get to see other people's network devices. But immediately, when you look at this pie chart, you get to know all the overhead. If you see a lot of purple and orange, you can say, wow, there's a lot of overhead happening on this channel. And you can do things to reduce that kind of overhead. So I'm going to go ahead and start my live demonstration. If you do have questions about the slides, feel free to ask them. In fact, if you have questions about the slides, now is a great time because I can actually show you with live software exactly what is happening. Okay, so this is what IPA looks like, and you'll look across the top. We have a Learn, Capture, Visualize, Analyze, and Package tab. Okay? And this is kind of your workflow. We want to make troubleshooting very easy to do. We want to make it a process. So if you have a Wi-Fi capture device such as an AirPCAP NX, this is a USB device that can listen to all 802.11n frames in the 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. And all you need to do is you plug it in, and it'll say AirPCAP USB device plugged in. You can choose the channel that you want to scan on. We'll choose channel 6. Sure, that works for me. And then you can choose channel bonding. We'll say +1. And if you want to do the 5 gigahertz, that's there as well. All you do is you click Start. Now, if you're in an environment where you have a problem of some sorts, very easy to just leave this device, leave a laptop doing the capturing running, and then recreate the problem. You know, follow a laptop around and see if you can recreate the problem, and you'll capture all of the frames, and I'll show you how easy it is to get down to a specific type of issue. So I'll click Stop. This is a really short capture. There's not a lot going on in my environment. However, I do want to kind of highlight how saturated my environment is with other Wi-Fi devices. Now I work in a 5-story building with a lot of small offices, and they each have their own Wi-Fi device, Wi-Fi network. So we'll start off at the top. At the top we have a time graph. This is airtime being utilized over time. Okay, so when you see that yellow line hit the top, that means at that point in time the channel was completely saturated. Okay, this is fully adjustable, similar to our spectrum analysis products, which is very, very useful. If you want to investigate what was saturating the airtime at that particular second, just drill in like that, and everything in the entire capture will change based on that. So if we want to see who was using the most amount of airtime, very easy to sort the table by airtime. So we'll click sort, and this will put one particular network there for airtime being used. So we can see who used up the most airtime at that particular second. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our default view. The first thing you should notice, filtering and changing parameters is very quick. It looks like my application crashed, so that's not typical, but like all packet analysis programs, it does happen. So let me get that up and running. Okay, so we'll go back to IPA, and I'm going to open up one of the demo recordings real quick. Now, I like to run IPA in a virtual machine. So I work on an iMac, and I have a MacBook Air, and I can run IPA in a virtual environment. The nice thing about the Mac computers, you can do monitor captures, you can create a good capture without a device, and then you can open that file in IPA. So that if you don't have an ARP cap, the software is still very relevant to Wi-Fi troubleshooting. So I've opened up an example capture, and on the left-hand side, you'll notice we have a bunch of SSIDs. This is similar to Insider. Okay, as I go through each SSID, you'll notice that different slices in the multi-layered pie chart get highlighted. This is the amount of airtime that one particular network was taking up. That means of the total airtime, this network took up 1/4 of the airtime, whereas some of these other networks took up less airtime. And I think a lot of people forget that when you have multiple networks on the same channel, they have to share it. And that's what IPA opens the eyes for a lot of people. They kind of say, oh my gosh, I had no idea that all of these devices were here. I had no idea that my neighbor's network was talking so much. What can I do to that? Another really useful thing is you'll notice that as I highlight one particular slice, you'll see it highlight in 3 different multi-layered pie charts. We call them tree pies. You'll see it highlight in 3 different tree pies. Now, if we were to open up the bytes multi-layered pie chart, we'll see that one particular device here, this Apple device, took up about 50%. It transmitted 50% of the bytes. And if I were to hover over this, I get to see some extra details about this particular client device. This Apple device was transmitting at a data rate of 18.1 megabits per second. And it also had a retransmission rate of 83%. That's very, very high. Whatever he was doing it wrong. Okay? So compare the airtime to the bytes. We notice 2 things. He didn't take up a lot of airtime, but a lot of bytes. And that's what we want to see. We want to see a lot of bytes being sent and not a lot of airtime being used. And that's primarily what we get to see here. It's being very efficient. Now, let's say we want to filter to our particular network. So if the one that I'm concerned about is Bronco Guest, I can start typing up in the left-hand corner Bronco Guest, and this will change my entire capture very, very quickly to show just the Bronco Guest activity. So now all the SSIDs I see here are just Bronco Guest. If I double-click on one of these, now I get to see all of the client devices that are currently attached to that Bronco guest SSID. So I get to see their MAC address, and I also get to see the data rates that they were transmitting at. And also, if you look on the right-hand side, the retransmission rate. Now, if you have to build some sort of deliverable or a report, you'll notice right here in these little icons here, you can copy these to the clipboard and paste it into a document, so you can report about anything that you want. But let's say, for the sake, we want to investigate this particular device. We notice that it sent a lot of bytes. Look at the bytes multi-layered pie chart. So if I click on this Apple device, we see it highlighted in the multi-layered pie chart. We see that it sent 8,000 packets and effective data rate of 18.1, but it had a retransmission rate of 83%. That's incredibly high. So I'm going to double click on this. Now I'm looking at just that Apple device. You'll see here we have the Apple device here. We see the data rate of the Apple device. We see all the fun statistics. Let's say I want to see that Apple device, all of the packets. Cool. That's easy. All I need to do is click up in the workflow. There's a packets section, and then we'll take whatever I've navigated to and show me just those packets. So we'll look. We can see the time delay between each packet. The flags represents which frames are being retransmitted. So how often were frames being duplicated? We can see the subframe type. And we can also see the data rate. This is something we care about a lot. We want to know how efficiently things are being said. So if they are talking slow and they're repeating themselves, we need to know that. We can also see, let's see if I can turn on the client. Let's see. We can also see the direction where it was going. So from a BSSID or to a BSSID, this arrow will show us the direction that it was going. Okay. So if I scroll down in the packet section, we start to notice that there are streams of QoS data sent, and each one of these streams has a retransmission flag, and it's being sent from the BSSID to the client device, and it's being sent again and again with the retransmission. And then all of a sudden, the client says, "May I speak?" Okay, and sometimes the client will respond with an acknowledgement. So he'll acknowledge. Let's see here. He'll acknowledgement the stream of data frames. But the access point does not hear the acknowledgement, and he keeps sending the data frames again and again and again. Okay? And the device will say, "Hey, can I say something?" And the access point will continue to repeat himself. So we have a problem. The access point cannot hear the responses from this Apple device. Okay, so let's say it's an iPad. The iPad may be on a metal desk, and it's, it can hear the access point just fine, but because it's on a metal desk and it's lower power, it's not transmitting loud enough for the access here. And that's why we'll notice this client's activity, the airtime spikes in the middle and reaches peak utilization of that channel, was because we're basically having these devices retransmit and use up an entire section of airtime for that. Okay. One really cool thing about packet analysis with IPA, you navigate using the pie chart. So if you click on the pie chart, you click in the center, it's going to take you to the access point activity. You go out, you're going to see everyone's activity. So now we're looking at just the Bronco guest activity. So these are all the packets that lie in the SSID of Bronco guest. In the left, up in the top left, you can see that I have a filter applied for Bronco guest. If I remove that filter, we are going to see more activity from other SSIDs. So give it a second to populate. See Bronco wireless, we'll see Bronco guest, we'll see a lot of different things, and we'll actually see lots of new BSSIDs as well. Okay, so filtering is very quick. We wanted to make it very easy. When we open up a PCAP file or we do a live capture, we parse it 3 times. We do all the heavy lifting for you. The rest is very snappy. And then at any point, if you want to just click on the multi-layered pie chart, you can get to one client device, and you can go to File, Send to Wireshark. And it will send that small section of data to Wireshark only. Okay? Now, I still haven't talked about one of my favorite pieces in IPA, and I feel like this is one of the best ways to use IPA, because not everyone understands packet analysis as well as, let's say I do, or someone else, or maybe your manager. And I'm sure a lot of you have some very, very good talents in packet analysis, but your junior technicians do not. And so what we wanted to do was to simplify the optimization process. So once you click on a BSSID, so you'll notice here that I have selected one SSID called Bronco Guest. I can click a star here. Now this star says, this is mine, I care about it, I want to work with it. You'll notice in the workflow in the right, we are going to give some analysis tips or some expert tips for you. And we can show you the amount of data, retransmissions, and control frames that were being taken up total airtime. The yellow slice that you see here, this says this is other people's activity of the total airtime. Okay. We can also alert you on high retransmissions, so which devices are having to repeat themselves a lot. We can give you some suggestions how to troubleshoot those particular retransmission issues. And you can always click Learn More or Too Long Didn't Read to learn more about the whatever we're showing. Okay. Now to give you a feel of what this is going to look like in, let's say, a real-world environment, that was an enterprise corporate. It was actually a college campus where they had deployed some Cisco Clean Airs. If we click Stop, what we're going to do is we're going to process times and crunch all the numbers, calculate the air times, and put it in conversations for you to navigate. Now, I can choose my network MetaGeek private like this, click the star, go to Analyze, and it's going to give me some observed issues. For example, there's something called protection mechanisms. And you can disable protection mechanism, which means it says if there is legacy data rates, ignore them. They might cause interference, but I can achieve faster rates if I disable it. Okay, so protection mechanism is kind of a legacy data rate support, and if you are going to go modern, you disable it. So sometimes you may have it on, you may have it off. We'll look at it and we'll tell you if it's on or off, and we'll tell you what we see. So, and we'll actually alert you if we see legacy data rates or we see legacy devices. So right now it says disable protection mode if legacy devices support is not required. So very useful. We can also go through other types of networks. So we can go to, let's say, an HP setup, and we can click a star here, and it's going to say we detected legacy data rates. If you don't have legacy devices, disable those data rates because those are slowing up a lot of things. So we do alert based on all of these things. So we make it very easy for people to identify which devices are having issues. At any point you can kind of look at these MAC addresses and you can go into the visualize section. You can type in a MAC address if you want. So let's say, or if you want to just look at the Apple devices, you can type in Apple here, and this will filter out all the traffic to show you just Apple devices on a particular network. You can do the same thing for Samsung devices, so you can type in Samsung, and this will show you the Samsung activity. Okay. One thing that is pretty useful that I haven't touched on, I'm running out of time, so forgive me. I'm going to go through it really quickly. And this is a short capture. I'm not sure if we're going to catch anything, but if you are investigating roaming issues, IPA can use multiple AirPCAP adapters to monitor roaming issues, turn off the data and control frames. Because roaming is basically joining and leaving a network. So you leave one access point, you join another. That means we can get rid of a lot of the beacons, the probe responses and probe requests, and then the action frames. Now IPA says there's no data that matches our filters, so we're unlucky. That's fine. I'll turn these back on and we'll actually go through a different capture. Don't save. Now IPA is going to save a file. That means you can open up in Wireshark or other places. It's also compatible with Wild Packet's OmniPeak. It's compatible with ComView for Wi-Fi. It's compatible with the Cisco AeroPeak file format. So a lot of packet files you can open up in IPA, and we'll look at it in our specific 802.11 visualization techniques, which are incredibly useful for finding channel congestion or retransmission rates. And we also make the filtering very easy. Okay. So we're going to turn off the control frames, the data frames, and we'll turn off the beacons, the probe responses, and probe requests, and the action frames. Now this will just show us the authentication frames, the association frames, everything else. So now we're down to just the packets of devices joining and leaving a wireless network. Again, I can use the multi-layered pie chart to navigate this. And now I can see by client device what their authentication and reassociations look like by device. So I can navigate completely using the multi-layered pie chart to see those frames happen. Very, very easy to do, very snappy. I'm sure you've never seen filtering this easy in Wireshark, so that's something that we pride ourselves on, is making your job very easy to do. So we'll go back to the presentation. I didn't get any questions, so I assume that I am the most amazing online instructor you've ever had. I'm kidding. So if you really do have questions, feel free to ask. www.metageek.net/product/IPA. This is a fully functional 15-day trial. Definitely worth trying out. Now, make sure that you have 802.11 captures. That means you were able to capture in full monitor mode, or you have a Mac OS 10 Mountain Lion or a Linux computer nearby. You can create a good 802.11 capture. This is not going to work with Ethernet frames. It's just going to work with 802.11 frames. I also have a free Wireshark color profile, so you can match Wireshark to IPA, so all the management frames will be purple, the data frames will be blue, and control frames will be orange. Very useful to go back and forth between. So MetaGeek bundles IPA with an AirP cap. An AirP cap is typically $700. You bundle it with IPA, you're going to save $200. So that gets you 802.11n capturing in both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And it's also going to get you professional software. And what's useful about it, it's got the expert tips now, so your junior technicians will know what changes they need to make to fix Wi-Fi networks and optimize them for faster speeds. So if you have questions or you'd like a copy of the slides, feel free to email me and request it. I'd be happy to send you a copy of the slides. You can follow me on Twitter. We also have resources available on our website, metageek.net/support. Now someone asked, can I use the Wi-Spy for regular Wi-Fi usage, or is it exclusive to MetaGeek software? That's a good question. The MetaGeek Wi-Spy, this is a spectrum analyzer. It doesn't work like a Wi-Fi card. In fact, it doesn't speak Wi-Fi, it doesn't speak Zigbee, it doesn't speak anything. It just measures the raw noise. And that's beneficial because, like we talked about, if you were in China and you only speak English or you only speak Spanish, you are only going to really understand the language that you speak. Now, a Wi-Fi spectrum analyzer is going to measure the amplitude noise of the buses driving by and the loud motorcycles and the people speaking Chinese and the people speaking English and the people speaking whatever language. It doesn't care. It's going to show you the noise levels and the congestion of that. But it doesn't read or understand English. It shows everything else. So it's very useful in that sense for troubleshooting interference. However, it's not a card that is capable of doing packet analysis or Wi-Fi scanning. Yes, so for the IPA, you are going to need the AirPCAP NX. If you don't have an AirPCAP NX, you can definitely create captures with a Linux computer or a Mac OS 10 computer, or a lot of APs will, like the enterprise level APs, will export a PCAP file. You should be able to open that in IPA. So you have a lot of options. You're not limited to the AirPCAP NX, but obviously the AirPCAP gives you mobility. You can go to the problem area, you know, like the corner of the office where they're having connectivity issues. You can troubleshoot from there. So for $700 or for $1,000, it's the perfect tool for sitting down and looking at the immediate issues that are happening in the Wi-Fi packets. Great questions. So I don't have any other questions, and it looks like that's all we have as far as our slides go. So thank you for participating. We had a great webinar. If you do have questions, send me an email, or you'd like a copy of the slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. And thank you for participating, and I look forward to doing more webinars with you. Thanks.